The morning sun had just begun to rise over New York City, casting a golden hue across the skyline. The city, a living, breathing entity, was waking up to another day filled with ambition, dreams, and struggles. Among the thousands rushing through the streets, Daniel Carter walked briskly, his worn-out shoes tapping rhythmically against the pavement. Today was his chance, a job interview that could change everything. For months, Daniel had been living on the edge, struggling to make ends meet ever since his mother's passing. The weight of responsibility had settled heavily on his shoulders, forcing him into a cycle of endless part-time jobs, each barely covering the essentials. Every dollar he earned was stretched to its limits. Life had been relentless, but Daniel had refused to surrender to despair. This interview with one of the city's most prestigious corporations was his shot at stability. If he landed this job, he could finally afford a decent apartment, buy new clothes, and maybe even allow himself the luxury of dreaming about a future. Clutching his tattered resume, he weaved through the busy streets, his heart pounding with a mixture of nerves and hope. He had exactly 20 minutes to make it to the office, and he couldn't afford to be late. The city bustled around him. Taxi horns blared, coffee vendors shouted out their specials, and businessmen hurried past, their briefcases swinging. It was a typical New York morning, fast, urgent, and indifferent. As he approached an intersection, a sudden piercing scream shattered the morning bustle. The sound sent a jolt through him, freezing his steps. Daniel turned, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on a young woman collapsing onto the crosswalk, her body trembling violently. A few bystanders gasped, stepping back, but no one moved to help. Cars honked impatiently, drivers annoyed at the unexpected delay, oblivious to the emergency unfolding before them. Time seemed to slow as Daniel assessed the scene. His mind raced. He had a choice. He could ignore the situation, rush to his interview, and secure the future he so desperately needed, or he could stop and help. For Daniel, there was never really a choice. Without hesitation, he sprinted toward the woman. She was convulsing, her breath shallow, her face as pale as paper. Panic surged through him, but he pushed it down. "Hey, can you hear me?" he asked, his voice steady despite the chaos around him. She couldn't respond. A quick glance revealed an allergy bracelet on her wrist, anaphylactic shock. Daniel had seen it before. His mother had suffered from severe allergies, and he knew the signs all too well. He frantically checked her pockets for an EpiPen. Nothing. He looked up, scanning the crowd. "Does anyone have an EpiPen? Please." Silence. People stared, their faces blank, unwilling or unable to act. His heart pounded harder. He couldn't waste another second. Scooping her up in his arms, he ran toward the nearest pharmacy. His legs burned, his lungs screamed for air, but he didn't stop. The pharmacist took one look at the girl and rushed to grab an EpiPen. "Administer quickly," she urged, handing it to him. With practiced precision, Daniel injected the medication into the girl's thigh. Seconds passed like hours. Then finally, her breath steadied, her eyes fluttering open. Relief flooded through him. "You're okay," he whispered, his own body trembling now. She looked at him, confusion and gratitude mixing in her gaze. "Who? You're safe," he reassured her. But as the adrenaline faded, a realization hit him like a freight train. His interview. He glanced at his watch. He was already 10 minutes late. Even if he ran, it was over. His throat tightened, but he forced a smile. "You should rest. I'll stay until you're okay." Her eyes locked onto his. "You saved my life." He shook his head. Anyone would have done the same. But they both knew that wasn't true. A nurse from a nearby clinic checked on the girl and assured Daniel she would be fine. Still, he stayed until she was stable. When she finally insisted he go, he walked away, his head hanging low. He had lost his one shot. The unexpected twist. Days passed. Daniel tried to move on, applying for other jobs, but rejection after rejection came in. Every morning, he stared at his phone, hoping for a miracle that never came. Then one afternoon, his phone rang. "Mr. Carter?" An unfamiliar voice said. "We'd like to schedule an interview with you." Confused, he asked, "For which company?" "Hamilton Enterprises." His heart stopped. Hamilton Enterprises was one of the biggest firms in the country. He had never even applied there. "Are you sure you have the right person?" he asked, hesitant. The caller chuckled. "Miss Hamilton herself requested you." Daniel's breath hitched. Miss Hamilton. The name lingered in his mind. He arrived at the towering skyscraper a few days later, nervous but determined. Stepping into the grand office, he felt a strange sense of familiarity. And then, sitting behind an elegant desk, was the girl he had saved. She smiled warmly. "I was hoping you'd come." His mind spun. "You're Miss Hamilton?" "Emily Hamilton," she confirmed, CEO of his company. Shock paralyzed him. He had risked everything for a stranger, and that stranger was one of the most powerful women in the city. She leaned forward. "I never got to thank you properly. You missed your interview because of me, didn't you?" He hesitated but nodded. "It doesn't matter. I'd do it again." Her smile softened. "That's exactly why I want you here." His eyes widened. "What?" "I'm offering you a job, Daniel. A position that matches your skills. Someone with your heart and integrity belongs in this company." Tears burned his eyes. The job he thought he had lost was nothing compared to the opportunity before him. "Why me?" he whispered. She met his gaze. "Because kindness like yours is rare, and I want people like you in my company." Emotion swelled in his chest. He had spent his life believing the world rewarded only the ruthless. But today he saw the truth. Kindness, even when unnoticed, had a way of coming back. He accepted the offer. As he left the office, he glanced up at the towering building, the sun shining against its glass windows. For the first time in a long time, he believed in something bigger than luck. He believed in the power of doing good, and it had changed his life forever.